Good evening. Welcome to Zion's Banner. It is so good to have everybody on. There we go. There's some folks in the house. It's going to be a little different broadcast. Um, kind of doing a little different message tonight and giving you some updates because we're taking Zion's Banner on the road again to the wilds of Idaho and into Montana, right near the Canadian border. And so we're going to have some changes during the next 2 weeks. As I speak in two, three, four, five, six, seven, at least 8 different churches. So this is what we call spring tour, and those of us who are involved with Chosen People and have connections as missionaries do spring tour every year right around this time. And so it's going to change things a little bit, but I have a premiere scheduled, and I should be at this really nice bed and breakfast up near Post Falls, Idaho. And so I'm hoping to, I've got this premiere set message that I gave at First Southern Baptist Church. And I am looking forward to going ahead, maybe getting you some beautiful shots of this bed and breakfast, and maybe even talk to the owners and see if I can get a little clip of them and introduce you to them. They go to the church, and then we're going to premiere a message that I did at First Southern. And then that should put me just in time to get home for the next Wednesday. And so we should be able to make that. So it's kind of like what I'm shooting for with the premiere this Saturday is Saturday Night Live in Idaho. So that's going to depend on the plane landing and the rent-a-car and me getting where I'm supposed to be. They have high speed and it's rated pretty good, so I'm hoping I can make this work. Let me just give you an idea with the update as to all that's going on and a neat way you can follow me. I hope. I don't quite know why that did that. Okay, there it is. Okay, I'm transitioning this so that you can see it in a second. Yes, on my website, there's a page called Where is Jeff? And so that Where is Jeff page, you can actually find me and go on. And so the URL is there. I'm kind of waiting for that to come up for you guys, but I'm just going to keep moving. There it is. And so you can go to that URL and you can find out when I have special events or if I'm in the area. And see what we can end up doing. If you know some churches that would be willing to have a speaker, I've already talked to somebody about a flyaway. And so I am very willing to go wherever God would lead me. I just got to be okay. CPM wants the expenses covered because missionaries live on faith support. And it doesn't mean we have faith that the plane's going to land and the rent-a-car will be okay. It means we have faith in the Lord, and so they like to see things covered. And there's some good reasons for that. Well, we don't want to spend forever with that. So I'm going to move us towards tonight's lesson 1 and go ahead and get that started here. You may see a blank thing for a minute. There we go. Because that's coming up right now. I'm transitioning. There we go. And we're going to end up doing this. There's the PowerPoint. And I'm going to move this down. It's going to take a second or two to come up. We're going to examine why the book of Esther is in our Bible and get some lessons from that. This was based on a Sunday school lesson I actually did, but I wanted to go ahead and do this for a reason. Let me tell you one of the reasons I'm doing this. When we did the training for Muslims, something very important was pointed out. The Muslims want to make this your Bible versus our Quran, one book against one book. But that's really not the way it is, because our Bible is a complete library of 66 books. And one of the things that George Saig likes to point out is it's not your Quran, one book against our Bible. It's your Quran, one book against 66 books that are in perfect unity with each other. And so what I really want to do is look at that a little bit. And when you're talking to Muslims, you need to make it about the entire library versus their one book. And so we're going to take some time with Esther. By the way, this fits in well with the message on supersessionism that we ended up doing. Um, and so that's terribly kind of neat in and of itself. So we're going to keep moving along with the PowerPoint and talk a little bit about that. There is an issue of canonicity with the book of Esther. There was debate as to whether it belonged in the Bible, both Christian and Jewish sources, which is, we've gone over why certain books end up in the canon, but there were actually disputed books. But God was still sovereign. And we're going to look at some of the reasons that Esther actually did end up in our Bibles. Um, and so that's where we're going to start our lesson, because the issue of canonicity is a big issue. How do we know we have the right books? By the way, that's something that will come up with Muslims, is they will say that our Bible's corrupted. And so it's terribly important that we end up uh, being able to really understand our canon and why certain things were included. And so that's why we're doing this. And we're dealing with the hard issues. If I was talking to a young believer, um, I might still go over this because they need to understand it. But I remember that when we talked about some of this stuff in our classes in seminary, some of the folks said, wow, this is really hard for me to sort of grasp and get, and it feels kind of funny, and it raises questions. And, but I'm glad it was all explained. And so we're going to spend the time looking at the canonicity. Let's look at the controversy here. Um, and I hope you can see this well when it comes up. The big question, or one of the big questions with the book of Esther, with Jewish and Christian sources, I'll just call them Christian sources as far as canonicity, was that there is no direct reference to God's name in the book of Esther. One of the things that was looked at with books is that a book that was part of God's word should probably directly mention God. There is no direct reference. Now, is there indirect reference to God? Yes, there is, both through providence and something else I learned when we were going through the book of Esther in Hebrew in seminary. I have an old copy, which is still in the box, of the five Megillot. Esther is read as a separate scroll. There are five of these that are part of the writings. They're called the five Megillot. Song of Songs is one. Esther is one. And so when I had a copy of that in the Hebrew and I was looking at it, I noticed a misspelling, which is noted in the text. Now, it's a variant spelling. Okay, I don't know if you realize that, but potato or potato can be spelled with the E or without the E. A certain vice president got in trouble over this. Okay, both spellings are equally acceptable. And by the way, he got made fun of, and he really shouldn't have gotten made fun of, because both spellings are acceptable according to the dictionary. So potato or potato, you know, but there are two words that are variant spellings in the text of Esther. And what's interesting about the variant spellings is if you take the extra letter in the variant spellings of those two words in order, you get the name of God. So does Esther have the name of God hidden in it? Now, it's quite possible that it does. I will tell you why. One, this book's being written in Persia. Right now, after Esther's time, things are cool in Persia, but you don't know how the winds are going to change. It's quite possible that the writer of Esther, Mordecai, wanted to be a little stealthy about things and not rub the Persians' nose in the victory that they had experienced. So it's possible that he may have encoded the name of God using a device that would have been understandable to his audience. Remember, the Esther wasn't originally written in the English language, and these variant spellings are allowable in Hebrew, even though they don't show up in English at all. So there is no direct reference to God, but we can't say there's no indirect. There's no specific prophet associated with the book of Esther. You have the law, the prophets, and the writings. Now, in the case of Daniel, there is a specific prophet. In the case of the historical books, there are prophets named and associated. Nathan is assumed to have written part of the historical books. Gad, also another prophet, is assumed to have written. Um, and then you have direct prophecy embedded in these historical books. And so there's no prophet associated with the book of Esther. Now, let me give you a quote by Tricia Wheelock, The Book of Esther, a book of critical issues. Um, the editor is John Barry, and it's the Lexham Bible Dictionary. It's part of my Logos. We'll be able to see that later. But the book of Esther has historically held a marginal position in both Jewish and Christian communities who have questioned the absence of religious elements, the veracity of the events, and the validity of the Feast of Purim. Now, Purim is an established feast now, but there were some questions early on. And so that's just a quote there indicating that, yes, this was a book that was disputed, but it doesn't mean it doesn't belong in our canon. We're going to look at some reasons why that's the case. Okay? Um, Norman Geisler, Canonicity of the Bible in Baker's Encyclopedia of Christian Apologetics. Very good source, but it's an electronic source. I can trace to see whether it's visible on Amazon, but if you look on Amazon and you look up the Baker um, Encyclopedia of Christian Apologetics, I think there is a hard copy available. Esther retained its place in the canon after the fathers were convinced that the authority was present, although less visible. Now, what does that mean? That it had divine authority, but that divine authority was a little bit more subtle as opposed to totally clear. As far as Jewish acceptance, now, it does not appear in the Dead Sea Scrolls because the Essenes didn't necessarily like Esther. And while the Pharisees celebrated Purim, the Essenes didn't celebrate it. And so the Essenes really had a problem with the existing sects of Judaism that occupied a main place around the temple, which would include the Pharisees and Sadducees, and they wanted nothing to do with them. And so they did the opposite. However, the book does appear in one of the 24 books listed in the Talmudic work. Barith, they have Bava Batra, 14b and 15a, dating to AD 100s. And so we have an early Talmudic tractate that lists Esther as one of the canonical books. But beyond that, there is a Targum of Esther. Now, why is this important? Because the Targums were read in the synagogue during Jesus' time. And if there's a Targum of Esther, there's a strong chance that Esther was being read in some of the synagogues, particularly the ones that Jesus ended up being part of. And that's why I'm going to switch us over here real quickly so that you can see the table of contents here and see the Targum of Esther. And I really kind of wanted you to be able to see that. So I'm going to go there, and conceivably, this should change for you in a moment, and you should be able to see the Targum of Esther. Should be there. Okay, I'm going to go ahead and put that up there right now. That was up there before. I have the Targum. Oh, that's just a background on the Targums. Sorry. But I want to give you a look at that. Here we go. I'm going to open to the first Targum of Esther. There we go. And that should be visible in just a second for you here. And you're going to see it looks a little bit different than you might expect if you were not used to seeing something like this. So that'll take a minute or two to get to you. But I actually have the Targum up so you can see it. Now, the Targum's date, again, indicates it's very likely that this would have been available in the Aramaic version that was used in synagogue alongside the Hebrew. And so that gives us the idea that when Jesus discusses the law, the prophets, and the writings, and this would be considered one of the writings, that he indeed would have considered Esther canonical, because he's talking about the law, the prophets, the writings. Esther's one of the writings. Esther probably was available to him and being read in the synagogue in Aramaic, with the Hebrew also being available. And so that's kind of where that's at. Now, there didn't seem to be, in short, I mean, I think that's a good reason for canonicity. You know, I looked to see whether Jesus accepted a certain writing as canonical. And if he accepted it as canonical, then I have good reason to believe it's canonical. And so that's why I'm going to refresh this real quick here so that this shows. There we go. That's why you're not seeing it. It'll take a second to come up. But that's why that's there. And so that's another reason that I really believe this book should be treated canonically, and should be treated as part of the canon, because I think Jesus would have been familiar with it and would have regarded it as part of the canon. There we go. And you can see the Targum there. I'm going to try to move around. That's what Aramaic looks like, by the way, just so that you know. Scholarly Aramaic is written with Hebrew characters. Now, when I look at this, I know it's Aramaic because in Aramaic, the endings, the prefixes are suffixes. And I also know that the Targums were written in Aramaic. And so the suffixes at the end kind of give me that clue. And so that's kind of what you're looking at there. But you're looking at a Targum. You're looking at an Aramaic paraphrase of a Hebrew book that would have been used in the synagogues in Jesus' day, which makes me believe that this was indeed considered canon, at least by Jesus. So I'm going to go back up to here, transition here, and we're going to put that Targum down now because we don't need it at the moment. And we're going to move back here and get this back up, and you should see that change for you momentarily. And we're going to keep moving along in our lesson, but Jesus' non-direct or indirect testimony is enough for me. And the fact that it does appear in the list of canonical books in the Talmud at 100 AD, which, by the way, was about around 10 years after the book of Revelation was completed, interestingly enough. So the Jewish canon is listed about the time that the New Testament canon, or Brit Hadasha, is completed. So you have the Hebrew canon being codified, being recognized, and then you have the completion of the Brit Hadasha, or New Testament, right around the same time as each other. So we're going to move on from there. Okay. Let me talk to you a little bit about Purim customs. I mean, I know it's after Purim and we're headed towards Passover at this intermediate. I do have to let you know that custom-wise, this book is read in its entirety on Purim. Now, each of the Megillot is read connected with a holiday. Song of Songs is read on the Sabbath during Passover. Ruth is read during Pentecost or Shavuot. Lamentations is read during what's called Tisha B'Av, which commemorates the destruction of the temple under Nebuchadnezzar. And so these books are read, particularly the five Megillot. When this is read, children actually dress up. So in Jewish custom, you didn't really have Halloween, you had Purim. And Purim was the version where people did that. Jewish people eat this really nice dessert called Hamantaschen. It's called Haman's ears. It looks like the hat he supposedly wore, and people often give to charity. That's just a little bit of historical background here. The book of Esther is still influencing Jewish people through the holiday called Purim. And to this day, it's a big deal. And that's just a little bit of Jewish background here. So let's talk about the story here. And we're going to start by talking about its place. Now, I said it's in the canon, and we have a library of books. You need to understand what Esther does for our canon. Again, it's part of the writings. Daniel's also part of the writings, okay? It's a companion book to Daniel. Now, that's the way I want you to start thinking. Esther does two things. It's the companion book to Daniel, and it acts as the link between Daniel and the books of Ezra and Nehemiah. Okay, Esther does not go back during the migrations. You have migrations that take place in relationship to Ezra and Nehemiah. The latter return. Esther and Mordecai don't go there. By the way, that's why some people feel they were unsaved. I do not agree, although I deeply respect Dr. John C. Whitcomb of the Genesis flood. In his commentary, he believes that Mordecai and Esther are unsaved. I do not. Because Daniel did not return to the land either. And if that becomes a major criteria, then there's a problem there. Daniel didn't sacrifice, he kept his prayer life going, but there's no indication that Esther and Mordecai did not keep some sort of prayer life going. Esther asks for prayer and directs it towards God. Mordecai refuses to bow to Haman because he will only bow to his God, which indicates a loyalty to God and a resistance to polytheism or paganism. What is the role of Esther? Daniel is about how to live in exile. It was written to the Jewish exiles to explain to them how to live in exile, how to live in an alien pagan environment. You think that's useful for us today? I think it's terribly useful for us. Esther shows how God protects his people even when in disfavor covenantally. In other words, the Jews were being disciplined. By the way, the Jews were being disciplined. The term Jews is used over and over in Esther in reference to the Israelites. So, again, my black Hebrew Israelite, I can't call them friends, I'll just call them black Hebrew Israelites, have it totally wrong because the Jewish people are the Israelites, according to Jesus in John chapter 4, according to Paul in Romans chapter 3, according to Esther and Mordecai, who clearly understand who their people are. And so the Jews are being disciplined, and that's why the Babylonian captivity. And God demonstrates that even when he's disciplining them, he will indeed protect them. So we're going to see a book about God's deliverance, and we're going to see a book about God's deliverance even when we aren't being perfect or faithful, because God remains faithful because he cannot deny himself. So let's keep moving. Now, we're going to go ahead and move through Esther here. And if you read the book of Esther, you will discover that Mordecai attempts to kill the Jewish people. But what charge did God give the Jewish people? Well, in Jeremiah, God told the Jewish people to seek the peace of the city while they were in Babylon. So the true prophet Jeremiah and the true prophets of God said, you need to submit to divine discipline. Go out, surrender to Babylon, this pagan empire. They will take you into captivity, but you are to seek the peace of the city, and I will still be with you, even in this exile. So they were contributors to the pagan society, even though it was indeed a pagan society, which is a good lesson for us. We need to be productive, good citizens, not placing man's law above God's law, but where we can be good citizens, we need to be good citizens. Now let's look at Haman's accusation. If you have your book of Esther, you would turn to chapter 3, verses 8 and 9. Haman said to King Ahasuerus, or Ahasuerus, or Xerxes, I learned it one way. I've heard it people called another way. But this is King Xerxes. There is a certain people scattered and dispersed among the people in all the provinces of your kingdom. They're infiltrated. They're all over the place. They've spread. They're thoroughly in the works. Their laws are different from all other people's laws. They do not keep the king's laws. Therefore, it is not fitting for the king to let them remain. If it pleases the king, let a decree be written that they will be destroyed, and I will pay 10,000 talents into the hands of those who do the work and bring into the king's treasury. So I'll pay you, king, if you'll go ahead and allow these people to be murdered. We'll turn everyone loose on them, and they'll just kill them wherever they live. Because they aren't like us. They're different. They don't really fit in, and they're infiltrated, and they're all over the place. They don't have a loyalty to you, O king. Now, where have we heard these sorts of accusations? And I will take a minute here. I'm not getting into party here. I'm getting into anti-Semitism here. We have a certain representative from Michigan who sounds a whole lot like Haman. Jewish people's support for Israel is dual loyalty. Their laws are different, O king. They don't obey the king's laws. These accusations are anti-Semitism, and they're as old as can be. And such words should not even come out of a congressman or senator's mouth. Neither should they be tolerated by the party the senator is with. And a lame declaration that we love everybody is not sufficient to deal with this. This is the spirit of Haman, and it has no place here. So, regardless of party affiliation, okay, if you want to go ahead and affiliate with a certain party, you should ring their phones off the hook until they deal with this young senator who is so far out of line that she needs some pushback. In fact, I think she needs more than pushback, but I'm trying to be a gentleman here. The threat and the letters were sent out. Now, this is Esther 3, 13 through 15, right after the threat. Sorry, folks, it's not the company, it's the hour. And letters were sent by couriers to the king's provinces to destroy, to kill, to annihilate the Jews, both young and old, little children and women. So this is complete and total genocide. In one day, on the 13th day of the 12th month. See, we're done with that. We're headed towards Passover season. And to plunder their possessions, a copy of the document was issued as law in every province, being published for all people, that they should be ready. They should be ready. Let me go ahead and undo this here, because I don't need to unlock it. I need to shut the sound off. There we go. They should go ahead, and a copy was sent to every province, to all people, to be ready for that day. And the couriers went out and hastened by the king's command. The decree was proclaimed at Shushan, the citadel, so that the king and Haman sat down to drink, and the city of Shushan was perplexed. Now we get a similar sort of language with Herod, okay, because it says that Herod was disturbed after the wise men came, and all Jerusalem was disturbed with him. And in the ancient world, if the king was disturbed, you could lose sleep. That was not a good thing. So the city doesn't understand what's going on. Why is he doing this? This is really strange. And, of course, the king and Haman have a drink over it. The villain. Well, the villain's interesting. The villain is introduced in the beginning of chapter 3. By the way, this makes a great play, and every year this play is acted out, and noise is made when Haman's name is mentioned, and yay when you hear Mordecai and Esther's name being read. And this is often done in play form, and it really works. I mean, Act 1 introduces Vashti and her falling into disfavor. Act 2 is Esther ends up coming into the royal position. Act 3 is the villain is revealed. And then you have Act 4. So it's really set up like a really, really good drama. After these things, Ahasuerus promoted Haman, the son of Hammedatha, the Agite, and advanced him and set his seat above all the princes who were with him. So Haman is our villain, but I want you to notice that Haman is an Agite. Now, why is that significant? Well, the rabbis noticed something. You have an Agite and you have a king Agag. But Saul and the people spared Agag and the best of the oxen and fatlings and lambs and all that was good they were unwilling to utterly destroy, but everything despised and worthless they utterly destroyed. That's 1 Samuel 15:9. So, the Agites were supposed to be gotten rid of. Saul spares the Agites. It looks as though Haman is descended from the Agites, interestingly enough. And so what Saul fails to do, Mordecai ends up doing, and Saul didn't finish the job he was supposed to. And look at the ramifications. Generations later, the Jewish people are paying because Saul didn't do his job. By the way, sin can have multi-generational effects. And God sees those effects. When God sees that sin is bad for us, he sees it's not just bad for us, it's bad for those who come after us. And there are side effects to this. I'll comment more on Mordecai. The dilemma. Well, easy. You've got Esther in the throne, right? But Esther's got a problem. She's favored by the king, but she just can't go in there willy-nilly. Esther spoke to Hathach and gave him a command for Mordecai. All the king's servants and people of the king's provinces know that any man or woman who goes into the inner court to the king, who has not been called, he has but one law: put all to death except the one to whom the king extends the golden scepter that he may live. Yet I myself have not been called to go into the king these 30 days. So, you see, this could mean death for Esther. So Mordecai's solution is just go to the king and deal with this. Let's just deal with it. Get his favor, get him to undo what he's done, and everything will work out well. But Esther says, look, this isn't so easy. I could get seriously killed. And the king would never hear my appeal anyway if I got killed, and I would be dead, and nothing would have been accomplished by this. Oh, and by the way, I would be dead. I mean, this is a big thing. So then Esther says, well, gather all the Jews who are present in Shushan and fast for me, neither eat nor drink for 3 days. That's not done anymore. The fast of Esther is a 1 day, 1 night sort of thing. It's done the night before, night and day. The maids and I will fast likewise. So she's not asking them to do anything she wouldn't do. And I will go to the king, which is against the law, and if I perish, I perish. Now, here's the thing. I know it doesn't say pray, but that little word there, fast, infers prayer. You need to understand that. Jews just didn't do a diet thing, okay? Fasting is what accompanied deep prayer. Now, I want you to see the picture because there's an emphasis on the scepter here, and it's not accidental. So when the king saw Queen Esther standing in the court, she found favor in his sight. By the way, the Hebrew or Aramaic idea, she found favor in his eyes, interestingly enough, and it's used over and over again. And the king held out to Esther the golden scepter that was in his hand, and Esther drew near and touched the top of the scepter. Okay? What's with the scepter? Well, let's look at prophecy here. Now, this is a legitimate use of prophecy. We're looking at a key item that's repeated in 2 different places because it's a motif. It's a scene prop that is important to the overall play that appears. It's a play prop that appears in certain scenes over and over again to emphasize the story of the total play. So it serves a purpose for the scene and it serves a purpose for the play. What scepter are we talking about now? Well, this is Balaam. It's his fourth oracle. I see him, but not now. I behold him, but not near. A star shall rise out of Jacob, and a scepter shall rise out of Israel, and bat the brow of Moab, and destroy the sons of Tumult, and Edom shall be a possession. Seir also, his enemies shall be a possession. While Israel does valiantly, out of Jacob one shall have dominion, and destroy the remains of the city. Numbers 24:19. So there's a future deliverer coming who is called a scepter and a star. This is not accidental. This is very, very deliberate. Now, I may be revealing things that you know, but we're going through why Esther is in your Bible. And there are reasons why Esther is in your Bible that relate to this scenery. This particular prop is used again in a story of deliverance to foreshadow something else in the story. So this contributes something to the overall big story of God. In fact, it contributes several things, and one is this image of a scepter in relation to Israel that really ends up being ultimately expressed in a person who is a deliverer. Do you see what I'm getting at here? See, God may not be overtly talked about in Esther, but boy, the fingerprints are certainly there. And I already said this. Omar is given the same basic problem, and that's the senator's name, Ilhan Omar, and she's terrible in so many ways. Okay. No matter where we live, we always live under another authority. Colossians 1:18, and he is the head of the body, the church, who is the beginning and firstborn from among the dead, and in all things he may have the preeminence. Remember, this future deliverer will end up delivering Israel, but he will also rule. And right now, he rules over us. And so we seek the good of the city, the secular city, while we live under the authority of our Messiah as the ultimate authority. And having some conversations with some black Hebrew Israelites, the key thing is we died to the law to be married to Messiah, and we are under Messiah's direct authority. And so, yes, we do seek the good of the city, but we do so knowing that we're under another authority. And God's people live under another authority. Messiah is the scepter of deliverance. Now, I went to Acts 4:11 and 12. The stone which was rejected by the builders has become the chief cornerstone, nor is salvation given, for there is no other name under heaven given among men by which they must be saved. Bottom line gospel. Messiah is the scepter. Just as a scepter had to be extended from the king to Esther, so Messiah acts as the scepter from our heavenly King, God the Father, by which we can enter his presence. He is the mediator. So Esther adds a part or a key picture to the large story, a prop that stands for something more than just what it is. Now, Jeff, you've always said it's all about authorial intent, isn't it? Are you then backing off on authorial intent? No, I'm not. Remember what we said. The scripture may mean more, but it can't mean less, and it can't mean something different. It means more because there'll be an eventual fulfillment of the scepter out of Jacob, which the scepter in Esther pictures, which is Messiah, but it doesn't mean less. See, that's the danger with allegorizing. You can't lose the original intent. The author may use allegory to highlight something, such as bringing forth the big issue of the scepter, but the scepter is a scepter, and the scepter is also prophetically talked about as more than a scepter and a deliverer. And by the way, the Numbers use of scepter comes before Esther. So the picture of the scepter as the eventual deliverer is already established by the time Esther is written. That's important because there's already an establishment that the scepter coming out of Israel is indeed a deliverer for Israel. And then the scepter pictured here is a picture of that greater scepter that was talked about before. So the motif, the prop, was established in its greater meaning before it was used in Esther. And so I think the author authorial intent is to point to Messiah, because the writer of this already knows numbers, and the spirit which is guiding him knows numbers. So this is not a violation of authorial intent. I'm upholding authorial intent by understanding that the author had access to part of the greater story of God. So let's talk about this. Now I'm going to do this. I'm a Jewish missionary. Yes, I believe that God is still going to honor his promises to Israel. I think you're hard pressed to look at the scriptures honestly and come up with any other view. And we looked at the arguments for supersessionism. And so I think the church must seek the good of the Jewish people. And I'd say if your church wants a speaker, that's absolutely fine. I'd be glad to come. But your church should really have some sort of giving to Jewish missions. That's it. I'm going to finally put a plug in here. I do more than Jewish missions, but I don't do less than Jewish missions. I'm a Jewish missionary that does crossover apologetics, and an apologist that acts as a Jewish missionary and an apologist more broadly. In other words, I'm more, but I'm not less. We can only approach the king if you're under the scepter, and the scepter of under the scepter of Jesus you must stay. We need to stay in Christ because he is the scepter by which we can approach God's presence. Now, I'm not going to take you to Hebrews, but Hebrews says much the same thing. So there's a basis for these scriptures in Hebrews about a mediator. There's pictures of a high priest. There's pictures of this scepter. Esther belongs in our Bible because it seems as though Jesus regarded it as canon. Jewish authorities eventually saw clearly marks of divine inspiration. God is definitely there in the background, although he's not directly mentioned. And so God saw fit to put the book of Esther in the Bible. By the way, just a side point, there are 2 books in the Bible named after women. So if you get the charge that the Bible is somehow against women, you simply say, look, there are 2 books named after them. At least one of those 2 books, by the way, is named after a Gentile woman. So when the rabbis get too uppity about some things, that is not a bad thing to point out either. Well, I'm getting ready for my big trip, and so things might be a little shorter tonight. But this is a turnabout. This is more of a Bible teaching, and I am both an apologist and a Bible teacher. And I'm also a missionary, and so I do love exegeting the scriptures. You will hear a neat message that I got to do at First Southern Baptist on Exodus 3, and I hope to be able to watch it with you and hear your comments. I do love the turnout. I don't know how many of you saw Sam Shamoon and I. If you didn't get a chance, go there and pass it on to your friends. We've gotten a lot of views. It was a really great interview. I loved having Sam here. We were able to have a great time together and discuss Islam, which came out of Arabia. And so, please like that. Feel free to pass this on. It's not a bad message on Purim. And so, as always, I'm thrilled for the folks who show up. It may not be quite what you expected, but it's the Word of God, and it's good to dig into. I'm going to open it up for some questions, but I'm going to down this PowerPoint here because we really don't need it. And I'm going to go back to my camera and maybe even had some questions from last week. So let me get that up there and down this, and we'll just go ahead and do that. And I'll let this go ahead and continue broadcasting. But, any feedback, anything you guys want to, oh, good. He's here, but he leaves before I finish tour. In case you're just tuning in, folks are typing questions. I can type, I'll just put this. I'm not a quick There we go. So, yeah, we'll see what we can do. He's looking to see if he can be out here more, but he's here only until the end of, well, I think he said the end of April, but there you go. So, probably not a lot else. Was there anything, let me just ask this. Let me do like a Q&A. If I could set up a poll on this, I'd do that. Were there any questions created by the broadcast with Sam which were not answered? By the way, if you check the comments, somebody put a lot of resources up. I don't know if they're still available, but they were really good resources as far as Sam's answering Islam, and a Shamulian is the YouTube channel. So he's on that, trying to get that up. I know what that's like. Um, and I'm just looking over stuff. Okay, it looks like we lost a few people this evening. Well, it will be a message next time. So, hey, look, get a great, kind of sermon time. But I do hope to have some shots of like where I'm staying, get some of the scenery, maybe introduce you to some of the folks that I meet along the way. Because one of the cool things about tour for me is I get in other churches and speak and meet a whole bunch of other people from other parts of the country. And that's a great joy to me. My only regret is that my wife won't be traveling with me. It's always fun when we get to travel together and do a road trip together. But that did not work out. So, yep. Just gonna put this in here. Okay. Just want to type a quick message to someone here. In case you're hearing dead silence, I know radio silence is bad. I'm just typing something to someone right now that I want them to see. There we go. So I just wanted to leave a quick message to everybody. Well, I think we're going to call it a night. The next time you should see me is at the premiere. Be praying because I need everything to line up, the flight to land, the car. Then I have about an hour travel from one state to another across the border. I'd have to get settled. It's a nice bed and breakfast. Get things up. They supposedly have Wi-Fi, and then I will try to join you on the premiere. Keep clicking away. I know that we're a different type of channel, but I'm thrilled for you that have come and stuck it out, and there will be more to come soon. And I may try to do a few short little bursts and introduce you to some folks on the way. When I get back, I may be able to introduce you to what I said along the way. So I'm glad that you were with me, and I'm going to just kind of get things done for tonight. Thank you, Nate. Let me just do a big thanks. And I'm just going to go ahead and sign off. So this is Zion's banner saying shalom, shalom. Let's hang out together again soon. And see you along my travels.